When it comes to releasing an album, does the order of the tracks matter? This is a question I've been asked before. Basically, when it comes to releasing an album, the order of the songs, is there any strategy? Is there actually a method to putting them in the right order, whether it's a creative perspective or even a logistical, or I might even say an algorithmic perspective? Now, there are a couple of things I do want to say. One, right now, especially in this day and age, and maybe even for the rest of the time, who knows, singles are kind of more in than albums, right? Of course, back in the day when you had records, cassettes, CDs, you kind of had to and typically just did release albums. It was very rare just to release a single that someone could purchase. Right now, it's the opposite. Second thing I will say is when you look at the algorithmic nature of Spotify, Apple Music, even YouTube, even just the way people interact with albums now, it's not like it used to be. Back in the day, you almost were forced to listen to the whole album. You hit play, you listen to it straight through, and then that would be it. Right now, people might click around because it's a lot easier to. And then in addition, if you look at, like I said, a platform like Spotify, typically when it comes to the shuffling or the recommended type feature, it might play randomly track number 6, then another one of your songs on a different album, or maybe a single here, maybe a song from a different artist, and then track 4 in your album, right? So things are more mixed up. So I will say, I think the order of an album, first off, isn't as important as it used to be. But I do think there is some importance still to it. And there's two things, in my opinion, that really it comes down to. One, which I think in my opinion is actually the most important, is the creativity, right? For me, I actually do spend, I've never really talked about this in any other video, but I do spend, when I release an album, actually a lot of time on the album order. Sometimes even like an hour or two, really thinking about the order of the songs. How do I want the album to flow? What do I want the journey to be like if you were to listen to it straight through? You know, all this kind of stuff. There is a lot of kind of like I said, method to the madness of putting the album in an order that kind of flows in a very particular way. So the first thing is creativity. Now, I'm going to be honest, I think this depends artist to artist. There isn't really any way I can describe this. Maybe I could do an entire video about it if people want me to. But I think a lot of it is kind of my mindset of being like, okay, if someone hits play and they listen to it straight through, what do I want their experience to be like? Do I want it to build up to something almost like a crescendo? Do I want to have kind of like an ebb and flow? Do I want to have this kind of interesting thing where in the beginning it kind of kicks off right away, then kind of dulls down a little bit and goes through this maybe low-key period and then picks back up at the end? Do I want it to be almost like a roller coaster where it starts off very intense with the hardening tracks and then slowly gets more and more like calm over the course of the album, right? These are the different things I do consider, even given the nature. Like, I've released albums that are more bass music when it comes to electronic. I've also released albums that are more maybe on the house end, which is a bit lighter, not as intense. I've also released albums, my biggest one being No Solution, which was 50 songs, which was a lot to release. All my kind of non-EDM music. And on that album, it was actually a lot of thinking of like, okay, well, how do I want this to flow? It's not really electronic music. Some of these songs are a bit more upbeat hip-hop. Some of them are more orchestral or cinematic. Like, how do I want this to flow? So that's the first thing, is just, I think, general creativity. The second thing, though, is what I will say logistical or algorithmic, right? Because this is the big thing, I think, when it comes to this question that one of my friends did ask. We've been like, okay, well, when it comes to Spotify, am I going to get more views if, let's say, I put the best song first, right? Am I going to get more views if I have a song go first that just hits hard and it, you know, hooks somebody, if I'd say it like that, for the rest of the album? The answer is kind of, right? And I think this is a big thing to keep in mind, that for me, I feel like the first song on an album really does set the stage. And I think there's two main, how do I word this? Intro or starting songs that you can have. One is kind of like an intro song. So it's not really a song. It's more of like, sometimes it's a minute or two, just something that almost builds suspense and kind of sets things off. Like for me, my third full-length album, 5 Seconds to Showtime, the first song is called Awakening. It was like a minute 20 seconds long, and it's actually a poem that I wrote. I hired someone off Fiverr to say it in like a very, good speaking voice type thing. I didn't want to say it myself. And then I made that into a song. So it wasn't really a song the way we think of it. And more of it was like an intro that sets off the tone of the album, because that entire album is all heavy bass music. So then the second song was my song Bass Fire, one of my most popular songs ever. It's a hard-hitting song, and I was like, okay, start off with like a poetic, orchestral type vibe, and then just jump right into it with no kind of warning or build up. Second song is a hard-hitting song, and then that helps set the stage for the rest of the album. The second thing you can do for your first song is to, like I said, have it be one of the best songs in the album. And I do think there is something to be said about this. Granted, I think the creativity of your album order, the track order, should be more important than any algorithmic thing. I will say that. But keep in mind, when most people listen to an album, even now, I know I was talking this before about the randomness, but even now, when most people listen to an album, and I've seen this on a lot of different platforms, like SoundCloud is a really good way to see this, YouTube as well, people typically start off with the first song. And I remember learning this from Neil Strauss. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He said his goal when he's writing a chapter, for example, is to hook you right away. Makes sense, right? He's writing a chapter. He has to grab your attention. And then the goal at the end of the first chapter is to kind of give you some suspense, maybe a cliffhanger, maybe something, to get you hooked on the second chapter, so on and so forth. And I look at the same thing when it comes to an album, right? If I'm going to have an actual song, not just like an intro song, like I said earlier, but an actual song be the first song on my album, I want it to have a really good hook. I want it to be potentially one of the best songs in the album. In addition, I kind of want to set the stage. If, like, say, the album is mostly bass music for electronic, but I have one house song on there, it doesn't really make sense for me to start off with the house record. I want to start off with a hard-hitting bass record that people are like, okay, this is what to expect for the album, and this is, hopefully, and should be, the best produced song. So I will say that. There is, I think, ignoring the creativity, at least we're now talking about more of the logistical thing, if you look at, like, creative versus logic, or emotional, if I might say that, versus logic. Logically, there is something to be said that the first song on your album really does set the stage, but also that's the hook one, right? For a lot of people, like I said, when they do listen to an album for the first time, when an artist releases it, the first thing they do is just hit play. And inevitably, and almost always, if they just hit play on the album, the first song that's going to play is the first track on the album. Now, yes, if, let's say, you don't have Spotify Premium or whatever, sometimes it does shuffle it, and you might get song 6 as the first one, but typically it will be track number 1. So I do think this is something to consider. At the end of the day, though, there isn't really a right or wrong answer to this, and I do want to make that clear that it's not like there has to be this magical formula that if you have it in a very specific order, it's going to boost your streams or views or all this kind of stuff. But there is something to be said that, one, I think having a creative approach, if someone, let's say, listens to it in order, that they have a certain journey to it. I think that's the best word I can say, where there should be some kind of reasoning behind the track order. And then secondly, like I say, if you do want to try to just make it as best you can, and you are looking at it from that perspective, being like, all right, but what can I do in terms of this order to actually optimize the potential playability of the album? Having a song really kick it off first, that could be your best one, it does help set the stage, because someone will listen to it and be like, oh, this is a really good song. And that brings them to the second song, and then third, and then the fourth, and then for the rest of the album.